Hello, and welcome to Armageddon Empires. If you go back far enough, you'd actually find I've recorded this game before on my channel years ago, and I was inspired to start playing it again based on my buddy Battlemode, who started a playthrough of his own. So I figured I would want to take a crack at it myself. Just as a heads up, this is not really a tutorial or introductory video. There's other people that have done those and have done them probably better than I could. Instead, what this particular episode here is going to be is me talking about a particular style of deck that I like to play with. I'm going to walk you through my logic behind how I designed my deck and what I hope to accomplish with it. It's a deck that I quite enjoy playing with, or it's a variety of a deck that I quite enjoy playing with. And yeah, and then depending on time, I'm probably going to try and play a game with it. If you're wondering about Might and Magic, don't worry. I am still uploading that. I believe episode 13 went live today on September 26th as of me recording this, and I've recorded up to episode 26, so plenty of wiggle room there. This is... the other reason I wanted to record this is because I got a new microphone, and I'm kind of testing this out rather than rolling the dice on Might and Magic, which is just if I screw up the recording on this, no big deal. If I screw up the recording on Might and Magic and mess with a save file or something like that, it is a bigger deal. So that's why I'm doing this. Anyhow, I am going to be playing, I'll go to create deck first here. I'm going to be playing as the Empire of Man. And they're probably my favorite faction out of the four factions. I'll leave a link to the manual and stuff like that as well, because there's some cool backstory to this. Basically, Earth gets caught in the middle of a war between the Machine Empire and the Xenopods, these two extremely powerful alien races. And we basically take on the role of being an anthill at Verdun, circa 1915. So they sort of blast everything around them and don't really pay much mind to us, apart from extracting what they can as far as resources are concerned. In the process of all this, the Xenopods mutate a bunch of humans and give them extra arms and turn some of them into giants and use them as shock troops, which become the Three Mutants. But I'm going to be playing as the Empire of Man, and they are my favorite faction, mostly because I think they're the most well-rounded faction. They're certainly not the most powerful. I would say that's probably the Xenopods, who I don't really enjoy playing, honestly. But I would say the Empire is definitely the most well-rounded of the factions. They can do a little bit of everything reasonably well, and they also play very well with the style that I'm going to be playing. So let's hop into Edit Deck, and I'm going to go into my Imperial Core. Now, the astute among you, or those of you who are familiar with Armageddon Empires, might notice that this is an extremely lean deck. It's got 40 cards and 102 points. Normally, the smallest game size you can set it to is 175 points. And as a matter of fact, 40 cards and 100 points is the minimum that you can actually have a legal deck with. So, yeah. This is about as small a deck as you can make, and, well, it is as small a deck as you can make, and still actually play the game. With a bunch of finagling, I could probably get it to an even 100 points as well, but I don't particularly care to do that. Now, the way that I like to approach this is probably a little unusual. Well, let's take you through it, because it'll hopefully start to make sense as I go. So we'll start off looking at my infantry. Now, you'll notice here, I don't have any of the very powerful elite Emperor's Own. I also don't have any of the Imperial Guards, or Imperial Grenadiers. These are both quite powerful units. The Grenadiers are great for taking out armored units. The Emperor's Own are just extremely powerful overall. I don't use them for a couple of reasons. One is because I rely a lot on boosting, like using tech and things like that to make my units more powerful. And the payoff with these guys is less than it would be with the cheaper units. Secondly, their special ability for Fanatic can be kind of helpful, but again, getting them up to 9 attack, if I can boost them in other ways, why would I ever use this? Spend hit points to add attack because it caps at 10, right? So you cannot go any higher than 10 and still have it be effective outside of a couple of edge cases. And then Valor, which gives them +1 attack, +1 defense for every friendly unit that gets destroyed. Well, my goal here with a deck this small is to straight up not lose units. So if this ability procs, it means I'm doing something else wrong. So I, at least with this deck, tend to ignore the Emperor's Own. They can be very awesome, though. The Grenadiers are just too specialized. They're very, very good at taking out armor, but not much good at anything else, really. And they're very expensive as well, at 4 action points, 3 human, 3 material, and 2 tech. One other thing you'll notice if you're familiar with this is my resource icons look different. And that's because way back when this was first released, well, I am colorblind. I was colorblind before this was released. But when it was first released, Vic actually, the developer of the game, did a colorblind mod for it that made it much more high contrast to help people such as myself who can't see basically in the vanilla game, human and materials resources are almost impossible for me to tell apart. I don't know which is which, honestly. And it makes it almost unplayable. So, yeah. Anyhow, where was I? Right, the units that I do take. I take the Imperial Pioneers and the Imperial Infantry. The Imperial Pioneers are actually not so much here to fight in my armies. I make use of the engineer ability with them, because that means that these guys can run around and build resource collectors, which is very, very useful, because the only other units that can do that are heroes. And I pretty much always have my heroes doing other more important things, like lead armies, or get me extra cards, or assassinate people, or all that sort of stuff. The assault is kind of whatever. They can get themselves up to 8 attack, but then they get 2 defense and lose their next turn. Not a big deal. Like I said, I don't tend to fight with these guys unless I absolutely have to. These Imperial Infantry here are the core of my army, with 4 hit points, 3 attack, 3 defense, 1 resistance, 2 movement, and 1 range. They are about as bog standard as you're going to get, but they are cheap as chips to deploy. You can deploy one of these on turn 2 because you need the 2 human resources. They're really, really cheap, and they also have this ability, Extra Attach, which means they can have an extra technology card sort of tacked onto them. That's incredibly useful once we get into, and I'll go into more depth once we get to the tech portion of this episode thing, whatever. So these guys really do form the core of my army. Also, they're important because infantry, with their combined arms ability, works very, very well with armored units. It basically, for every infantry you have in your army, it will boost the damage of armored units in that same army. Very useful. I'm going to skip over the power battle armor for now and keep talking about my core army. It just makes more sense to me. Now, with my armor, once again, I've ignored the big boys. I've ignored the elephants, I've ignored the tigers. These are great units, very, very powerful, very expensive to deploy. Like if you're fielding a tiger, or especially if you're fielding an elephant, you're basically doing nothing else that turn. They're going to drain all of your action points just to deploy one of these. Plus, they're extremely expensive resource-wise. The 4 materials, 4 energy, 4 science is no joke. You get one of these guys in your starting hand, you're probably not going to be fielding it until like turn 20. So, an important consideration. Likewise, the Tigers are a little bit cheaper, but not by much. But very powerful units, and certainly don't overlook them. They don't really fit with how this deck sort of meshes together. Instead, what I have are these Panthers, who are a solid medium tank. One big advantage that they have over the Tiger and the Elephant is you'll notice that both of these have a movement of 2, whereas Panthers have a movement of 3. Mobility on the hex map is really important. Being able to respond to threats and exploit weaknesses and all that sort of stuff can be really, really important. And really lets you punch above your weight class. The assault ability is also kind of useful. You can bump them up to attack of 10 if there's something that you just really need to die. So that's something to not overlook as well, especially once you factor in if they're operating with infantry, they're going to do extra damage. The Leopard is a light tank, quite a bit weaker, actually not much stronger than the Imperial Infantry, but once again, they're cheap as chips. Actually, if you draw one of these, you can deploy it on turn 1 with just your starting resources. The reason that these guys are really valuable, though, is this recon ability. You don't necessarily want them in like your main offensive army, but certainly for armies that are going around bashing at resource hexes and stuff like that, having a Leopard can make a huge difference because it lets you see what you're bumbling into before you actually attack. You'll be able to see from an adjacent hex what exactly is in there, which can be a lifesaver. The Cheetah is a little armored personnel carrier, and this is the magic that makes this deck work. Infantry Support. So, choose a friendly infantry unit. That unit gets +3 attack, +3 defense until the end of the round. One unit also gains the speed of the vehicle for movement purposes. So these guys have movement of 3. The infantry normally have a movement of 2. You partner them up, and all of a sudden your infantry now have a movement of 3. And by using this close support ability, these cheetahs can turn those Imperial Infantry into 6 attack, 6 defense, which suddenly makes them much, much more survivable. It synergizes a little bit better with something like the Emperor's Own, but that's before you start stacking tech on them. So there's also that consideration. It went too far. Also, rapid reaction is very valuable. Normally, for every unit in an army, it takes 1 action point to deploy. And since you can have armies consisting of up to 8 units, 4 in the front line, 3 in the back line, plus a hero, it means that it could potentially cost 8 action points to move. Whereas with this, my standard army would consist of 1, maybe 2 Panthers. If it's 1 Panther, then also 1 Leopard. So 2 tanks, 2 Imperial Infantry, 2 cheetahs, and then the last one being one of these Minotaurs, which is an artillery piece that also has a movement of 3. So there's a full stack, but it only costs 6 movement to run it around. Which makes it fairly easy to get the units to where, like, get your armies to where you need them to be. And you don't have to drain all your movement points in doing so. Okay, so we've talked infantry, we've talked armor, I've mentioned battle support a little bit, so let's jump down to that. I skip over the mechas. I don't use them. Vengeance is too expensive. It's even more expensive than the Elephant. And the Vindicator is a great unit, but again, quite expensive. And movement of 2, and just doesn't really fit with the overall army. The anti-air can be pretty useful, though, sometimes. Especially if you're fighting the Xenos, because they have some very, very good ground attack aircraft that this can help ward off. As for battle support, really the only three I ever consider are the Groms, the Reapers, and the Minotaurs. The Minotaur is the weakest of the three, with the Grom having an attack of 8, or sorry, the Reaper having an attack of 8, and the Grom having an attack of 7. The Grom can also attack a second random target in the same row as its initial target. It disables, lowering their attack by 2 for 2 rounds. And then the Reaper is similar, except it will automatically commit whatever it hits. It's got that shock attack ability, and it decreases their defense for 2 rounds. So this is a great way to soften up a big, tough, heavy unit. But again, the issue I have with these is the movement of 2. They slow my armies down, and I don't like my armies moving slowly. The Minotaur does less damage overall, but it does have disable and disrupt, so it lowers their attack and their defense, but only by 1. A case could be made for all 3 of these. The Minotaur just fits with sort of how I design my armies the best. The rest of these I ignore. The Puma is a little anti-air gun. If you want anti-air in your army, you're better off taking the Vindicator. It is just more useful in general. The Field Post provides supply, but I never had much of a use for it. The Artemis is situationally useful because you can fling missiles at things, so that can be helpful. And the Osmodius collects resources, which again I've never really had that much use for. It moves incredibly slowly too, and it's super, super vulnerable to any kind of an attack. So I've never used it. Special ops teams I never use. I never use commandos. I sometimes use the forward air controllers. Commandos suffer from a problem of trying to do too many things and kind of sucking at all of them. They're very weak on attack. They've got reasonable defense. They are stealthy, so they can run around and sneaky sneak. But sniper, maybe you could take out an enemy hero in a battle. But commando can be useful if they're operating deep behind enemy lines, but we'll get to my reconnaissance in a second here. And then assassin, they can attempt to assassinate enemy heroes on the map, but I would rather use heroes to do that job. So let's talk about my actual reconnaissance, because reconnaissance is super, super important. We already talked about it a little bit with a leopard, but that is certainly not all the reconnaissance I have or I would want to have. If you're running around with 2 recon units, you're in trouble. The Imperial Recon, I only have 2 of these. These are mostly defensive. They stick in my territory and they just sort of patrol back and forth, keeping an eye out for enemies trying to infiltrate into my territory. They're basically stuck in my own supply range. They're very fast moving though, so they can boot around really efficiently, just hunting for stuff. Terrible in a fight though. Attack to defense 2. If these things get seen, they die. Fortunately, they do have stealth, which helps keep them alive, especially operating in my territory, where they'll have other things that can support them. But yeah, very, very valuable unit from like the early game right through to the end. Keep these things alive. They're important. My other reconnaissance are these Imperial Rangers. These guys are pretty potent medium infantry. Attack 4, defense 4, hit points 6. Pretty tough. They have this counterattack ability that basically means that if an enemy misses them, they do damage. They've got stealth as well. They can perform reconnaissance, and they have this commando tag, which basically means they can range around in enemy territory, causing all sorts of havoc. And the option is he can either detach a reasonably sizable force to take these guys out, especially if there's a pack of them. Or he can ignore them and you just like blow up his resource generators and all sorts of stuff like that. Very, very powerful unit. I love using them. For added fun, if he does track them down with a big, powerful unit, then you can also just put a Shiva tactical nuclear weapon on them and they blow it up. So that's a thing that I've done on more than one occasion, actually. Related to the Rangers, I'm actually going to then jump into my Scouts first here. And you've got two options for Scouts. You've got Adam Wraith or Sigmund Gordon. These guys basically lead the Rangers, and I tend to prefer Adam Wraith. Only partially because his name is from Jack Vance's Planet of Adventure, which is one of my favorite book series by Jack Vance. So that's part of the reason. But the real reason is he increases his army's movement rate. So that means that if you put him with a pack of Rangers, they're going to be able to run around at 6 hexes per turn. He can also engage in stealth, and he is a bounty hunter. So one thing that's really fun to do with him is team him up with some Rangers and send them off to hunt enemy heroes who are building resource collectors. And he can just capture them or kill them in the field. But more often than not, capture them. And capturing enemy heroes is a very powerful thing to do. So partner him up with the Rangers, and they can cause all sorts of havoc. It's great fun. So I've talked about my recon, I've talked about the army. Now let's talk about the generals. There are 4 very good generals, 2 terrible generals, and 2 situational generals. And I might actually, I'm going to remove him. I'm going to free up a card here. I'm going to juggle things around a little bit. So you get to see me do some deck design live. So for my generals, let's start with the bad ones and why I don't like them. Honor Harris is probably the worst. Which is highly disappointing because she's named after Honor Harrington, I believe, from a fantastic book series by David Weber, I believe. But anyhow, Honor Harris is a bad hero. And that's because Trickster is never a skill that you want to use. A Trickster basically makes you lose less badly. It doesn't help you win. It makes it so that if you lose, or you're going to lose, you can run away. You shouldn't run away. Even if you're in a fight that you can't win, you should try and take down the enemy as hard as you can before you die. Weaken them as much as possible. And better yet, don't get yourself into those situations in the first place, where you're going to lose an army. Tactical Genius is actually quite good, but it doesn't offset the uselessness of Trickster. Winston Lau is also quite useless because I have no idea what I would do with him. He extends the supply range of his army by 2. Okay, that's good. But then he also engages in stealth. Now, the only army that I'm going to be wanting to run around in stealth are these Rangers. And they already have commando, so they don't care about supply. And then Tactician, this would imply that he should sit in a base and develop tactics cards, which, why would I do that? If he's supposed to be extending his army deeper into enemy territory and stealthily sneaking around while doing so, why would I want him sitting in a fortress generating tactics cards for me? Seems a little counterintuitive. These 2 are situationally very useful, especially Burwell Puller. Burwell Puller, you only ever include him in your deck if you are also including Imperial Marines, because these guys can do air assaults. Basically, they're jump troops. They can jump, in this case, 4 hexes, and attack an enemy. They don't have to spend movement points or anything like that. They just charge in and attack. And they're very powerful with an attack of 7. They get to make 2 attacks against the same target, so they can take down big, beefy things quite effectively. And yeah, they're just good. Now, with Burwell, he decreases the AP cost of area assaults by 2. Makes it cheaper to deploy them. He also extends their range by 2. Makes them fly further. That's cool. But if he's not combined with the Marines, then he's just a mediocre general who you don't really care about. Vandergrift is also similar. He doesn't extend the range, but he does decrease the action point cost. And he will increase the maximum hand size if he's in your headquarters. These kind of work against each other because, again, if he's supposed to be leading squads of Marines jumping on enemies, well, then he's not sitting in my headquarters giving me a bigger hand size. But still can be useful, especially if you want to play with a lot of Marines, and that can be a very fun deck to play. Just get 2 or 3 big armies of Marines rolling around and stomp all before you. It can be quite fun. So let's talk about the good generals now, and we'll start with the one that I actually removed here. Carter Powell is a great general, but he is designed around like a powerful elite army. You'll notice he only has a command rating of 6, which means he can only command 6 units. He also reduces the cost to activate that army by 2 action points, so he can respond fairly quickly. So the most it'll ever cost him to move an army around is 4 action points, which is kind of nice. And he decreases the AP cost to repair a unit. That synergizes really well with big beefy boys like the Vengeance, or the Elephant, or the Tiger, because you're never going to have a lot of them in your deck. But he's going to let them move around easier, and though he doesn't speed them up, it lets them kind of continually make that slow plodding advance across the field, even though they're only moving at 2 hexes per turn. So they'll get there eventually, because you'll be able to afford to move them every turn. And then if they do get damaged, he can repair them a lot easier. So very useful general for that, but just doesn't work with this deck. I hadn't realized I'd left him in, honestly. The 3 that I like. Let's start with let's start with Eric Mai, because he's sort of he spends most of his time sitting in my headquarters. He is my tactics card creator. He commands like the garrison in my headquarters, and he gives an action point boost if he's in the same hex as a friendly academy, and he makes it easier to make tactics cards, which are very, very valuable. I guess this is as good a time as any to talk about the tactics cards. So here they are here. This is just a screen capture I took straight from the manual. So what this means is in battle, I can actually play these. I can give my heroes extra fate points, which allows rerolls. I can just add more dice to an attack or defense roll. I can force my opponent to reroll 2 dice that were successful. I can turn 2 of my opponent's success dice into failures. I can just give myself 2 extra successes. Or I can force my opponent to reroll all of his dice. These can be game changers in a close fought fight. And so having Eric Mai just sort of exist to churn out tactics cards and also give me extra action points is well worth including him in my deck. And he's a pretty decent commander if he has to. Like if I'm stuck and I need a general, he's perfectly capable. Vladimir Kost here is generally a defensive general for me because he increases his army's movement rate. And tactics cards don't cost action points to play when he's in command. Very often, if you are fighting on your turn, or on an enemy turn, you won't have a lot of action points. And so being able to deploy the tactics cards without paying action points is actually incredibly useful. And then the bonus to initiative is also just generally helpful. So he can make my armies move around really quickly. He can actually cause my core armies to move at a speed of 5, which means that if there's something coming in that needs to die, he can get there and intercept them. And then when he does that, I can throw a whole bunch of tactics cards into the fight, because he usually has sort of a secondary army that isn't as powerful, to swing the odds in his favor. So I use him, basically, he exists to defend my territory. My offensive general is Ulysses Stark, and Ulysses is the best hero that the humans have, at least the best general that the humans have. He is a sexy man who looks good on all the recruitment posters, so he just straight up attracts humans to join the fight. He's a raider. He extends the supply range of his army so they can go further into enemy territory, and he just straight adds a +1 to the attack and defense of all of his units. So you put him in charge of those Imperial Infantry. They are 3/3. They become 4/4. You team them up with a cheetah, and they become 7/7. And then you put more tech and stuff on them, and they really start to get scary. So Stark is a wonderful general. Always include him. I think the reason I had Powell in here was actually as a secondary general. And like in case something happened to my or cost. And that's actually a reasonable sort of edge use case for somebody like Winston Liu, where if you lose a general, you could use him to replace it, and if you don't need him, then he can sit and churn out tactics cards. So something to consider. Honor, I still wouldn't take, kind of regardless. But even in that case, I'd probably still go with Powell, honestly. But anyhow, we'll come back to that. I might leave this at 39 and give it a think. I already talked about my scouts. Agents, I only have one. Carlos is basically here as an assassin mostly, and his job, I tend to use my assassins fairly defensively. If an enemy army is pushing into my territory, I'll try to kill their hero, and that will cripple an army incredibly quickly. Mata's a great offensive agent. You send her into enemy facilities and she can start blowing things up and conducting espionage, both of which are quite useful. Vance is a great guy to leave parked in your base. Gets you extra action points if he's in an intel center, and it makes it harder for enemy agents to muck about in your base, so that's helpful. Valentine's a nice all-rounder, and part of me kind of wants to actually add her as a replacement for Powell, but not sure yet. So the intellects. So realistically, I probably don't need both of these. Between the two, I would probably go with Mudge. Get rid of Mudge, rather. But I like these guys too much. So Vincent Mudge and Cornelia West are basically, their job is to sit at home in my headquarters and make my life easier. Mudge just increases my hand size, and he increases the supply range of everybody by 2. There's nothing bad about either of those things. They're both incredibly useful. Cornelia makes it easier to do all of the science, and she increases action points. And makes it cheaper to draw cards. Again, these are all things that are wonderful. Drawing cards faster lets me, for fewer action points, lets me draw more cards, which synergizes with Mudge, which means I can have a larger hand size, which means I can get through my deck faster, which means I can deploy more cards, which means I can just snowball. And the idea behind this deck is you get powerful quickly, and you kill the enemy before they have a chance to get powerful. So, in a lot of ways, this is a deck about rushing your enemy down. Now for my scientists, I only have 2, and actually that might be what I should do for my extra, with my extra card here. So let's talk tech. We'll start with Hannibal Zarkov here because he has both. So technology, you get these things. You pay this, and then he has a chance to create that particular item. Now, in the case of humans, all of these things can get deployed onto different units. So this gets added to tanks. It increases their defense by 1. It lowers the amount of damage they take by 1. It just makes your tanks straight up more survivable. The PK burst lasers get added onto my infantry, or power battle armor, or whatever. Basically, if it walks on 2 legs, you can make it and has opposable thumbs. Well, actually, some of the mutants and the Xenoguides don't even have opposable thumbs. If it has opposable thumb analogs, then it can cart one of these around. It gives it an extra attack, and this energy weapon 4 means that if it hits, it does an additional 1 to 4 damage. Cool beans. The Shiva Tactical Nuke is just a devastating card. It does 8. It has an attack roll of 8, and if it does 1 point of damage to anything, that thing dies. The Viper and the Ajax, I don't tend to build that much. They can be useful to have, especially defensively. If an enemy army is approaching one of your fortresses, you start hitting them with these, and you can really wear them down. And then you've got a big old nuclear bomb. So, yeah, that kind of does what it says on the tin. Genetics is another really cool one. And sorry, the other big advantage to... Oh, not that one. Look up again here. This is where the other big advantage of the Imperial Infantry come into play, because I can give them these burst lasers and Shivas. And when you've got both of those working together, they can kill a lot of things, especially since if they're with Stark and got the boost from the APC, they're already at 7 attack, 7 defense. This bumps them up to 8 attack, which puts them on par with like the Tiger tank, maybe even better. And then anything that they can't kill with that, they can kill with that. So that's why I love the Imperial Infantry. Anyhow, genetics. So in addition to having a tech card, they could also have one of these. Could give them the combat mutagen for even more attack and defense. This is a good thing to throw into your... Either of these are good to throw into your tanks. And the nanite injections are great. This makes your heroes a lot better. Genetics are really, really important for the humans. If for no other reason than because eventually you can get the God Soldier, who just... well, he's a monster. He regenerates 3 hit points per turn. It's silly. He's almost impossible to kill. So, yeah. If you're ever really, really stuck, build a couple God Soldiers, and you should be good to win the game. Unless your enemies also throw Super Soldiers at you. Okay. So, Hannibal Zarkov can do either tech or genetics. Handy. Milton Jarek is a very strong geneticist, kind of mediocre technologist. I think with my extra card here, I'm actually going to add Fenmin in. Albert Fenmin. However you're supposed to pronounce that. He only does technology, but he makes it easier for other scientists in the same hex to do their work. Strangelove is... I wish I could justify him a bit more, because I think him being named after Dr. Strangelove is fantastic, like right down to him being in a little wheelchair. That's awesome, but he's just not good enough. Technologist, human tech is good, but human genetics is better. And Tactician, I've already got a Tactician in the form of Eric Mai here. And it's not worth doubling up on tacticians just for the sake of it. Okay, last up, we've got my the facilities here. If it isn't obvious yet, I'm pretty reliant on research in this. So I have 2 research labs, a single war college. That's just to boost up my units, and then a single intelligence center. So the strategy behind this deck really revolves around getting these inexpensive units out quickly to get decent armies out early, and to grab land to take clay with those armies. And then as the game progresses, you start powering them up. You start putting the tech on them and that sort of stuff. They can become very, very tough. Oh, something I completely overlooked. Air power. I have 2 airplanes. The Joint Strike Fighter, or JSF-2, is just a handy general purpose fighter bomber, basically. It's also air-to-air capable, so it can intercept enemy air cards, which can be very useful sometimes. And then the Nightwing is a game winner. You combine the Nightwing with the Alpha Omega device, and you kill an enemy stronghold, and then you win the video game. It's really that simple. So that's what the Nightwing is there for. But I think that's pretty much everything. Now, one of the other nice things I like about this deck is it's very easy to expand on. This is a baseline. If I want to, I can be like, I feel like adding some tigers to it. Sure, let's add some armor. We'll put 3 tigers and an elephant in, and then, because they want somebody in charge of them, we'll put in Carter Powell. Cool. I'm still only at 126 points, and I've just added some very heavy armor. I could even throw in a Vengeance. If I don't feel like doing that, maybe I want to experiment with Marines. So I could take, instead I could take Burwell Puller. And I could throw in, sure, 5 Marines. And there we go. Now I've got a Marine army. This deck is very flexible. It provides a really strong base that you can build from, and build in different ways, in kind of whatever way you want. So that's why I like this deck. I hope that makes a certain amount of sense. And yeah, so I do plan on doing a playthrough with this. I'm not sure when exactly that will be, but hopefully you stick around for that. And yeah, until then, enjoy. Cheers.